The fluorescent lights of the executive floor had never felt so harsh. Chadwick Townsend stood in front of my desk that Tuesday morning, his $70 haircut and custom-tailored navy suit practically screaming new money and unlimited arrogance. Behind him, at least 24 of my colleagues had gathered, drawn by the commotion like sharks to blood in the water. "Vaughn Merritt," he said my name like it left a bad taste in his mouth. "I've been reviewing the numbers, and honestly, I'm shocked you've lasted this long. You're dead weight on this payroll. Pack your desk." The conference room across the hall had gone silent. I could see faces pressed against the glass walls, some horrified, others barely concealing their satisfaction. Chadwick wanted an audience for this. He wanted everyone to see what happened to people he deemed unworthy. What he didn't know, what nobody in that building knew except my attorney and the filing clerk at the county records office, was that 3 weeks ago, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, I had signed the papers that made me the majority shareholder of Stratum Industries. And I knew something else. The next board meeting was scheduled for exactly 6 days from now. Natural Channel welcome. Stories like this one, the kind where corporate giants make assumptions that come back to destroy them, they don't just exist in fiction. They happen in boardrooms across America every single day, and you found the place where we talk about them honestly. You're watching the Corporate Vault channel, where the real dynamics of power, business, and human nature get examined without the polish or propaganda. If these kinds of stories resonate with you, if you believe in understanding how corporate power really works, join us on this journey. We're building something here, a community of people who want the truth behind the boardroom doors. Help us reach our first milestone of 1,000 people who think critically about business, leadership, and accountability. The subscribe button is right there, and your support means we keep bringing you these stories. My name is Vaughn Merritt, and before that Tuesday morning became the talk of the industry, I was the Senior Vice President of Strategic Development at Stratum Industries. 42 years old, 15 years with the company, and the architect of 3 of the 5 revenue streams that kept Stratum competitive in the building materials sector. I didn't come from country club money. My father ran a hardware store in Columbus, Ohio, the kind where he knew every customer by name and extended credit to families going through rough patches, because he understood that sometimes good people hit bad luck. My mother taught elementary school for 33 years, and our dinner table conversations revolved around the importance of treating people with dignity regardless of their job title or bank balance. That upbringing gave me something that apparently couldn't be taught in business school, the ability to see people as human beings first and employees second. It made me effective in ways that spreadsheets couldn't measure, and it also made me a target for people like Chadwick Townsend, who measured human value exclusively in quarterly earnings reports. The story really begins 6 months before that humiliating Tuesday. Arthur Pemberton, the 78-year-old founder and CEO of Stratum Industries, called me into his office on a Friday afternoon in March. The old man looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. "Vaughn," he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from his mahogany desk, "I need to talk to you about the future." Arthur had built Stratum from a single cement mixing operation into a $2 billion enterprise spanning 6 states. He was the rare type of businessman who believed that profitability and ethics weren't mutually exclusive. Under his leadership, Stratum had maintained a reputation for quality products, fair dealing with suppliers, and employment practices that actually valued the people doing the work. "I'm dying," he said without preamble. "Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors are saying 6 months, maybe less." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Arthur, I'm so sorry. Is there anything?" He waved away my concern with the same hand gesture he'd used to dismiss bad ideas in strategy meetings for the past decade and a half. "Don't. I've had a good run, built something meaningful, and I'm at peace with it. What I'm not at peace with is what happens to this company after I'm gone." He pulled out a folder, the old-fashioned manila kind that seemed anachronistic in an age of digital everything. Inside were documents I couldn't quite make out from my position across the desk. "My son has no interest in the business," Arthur continued. "He's happy teaching philosophy at Berkeley, and I respect that. My daughter has her medical practice, her own life. The board wants to bring in outside leadership, and they've already got a candidate lined up." "Who?" I asked, though something in my gut already knew I wouldn't like the answer. Chadwick Townsend, 45 years old, Harvard Business School, 10 years at Kellerman and Associates, cutting costs and maximizing shareholder value. The way Arthur said, maximizing shareholder value, sounded like he was describing a communicable disease. That's a consulting firm, I said carefully. They're known for aggressive restructuring. They're known for destroying companies from the inside, Arthur corrected. They strip assets, offshore jobs, cut every corner that isn't explicitly illegal and sometimes a few that are. They make a handful of investors wealthy while gutting everything that made a company worth building in the first place. He pushed the folder across the desk toward me. I've been selling off my personal stock quietly over the past 4 months, not my controlling interest. That would trigger all kinds of disclosure requirements and send the stock price into chaos. Just enough to build up liquid capital. I opened the folder. Inside were stock certificates, transfer documents, and purchase agreements. The numbers made my vision blur. Arthur, this is 43% of the company. 43.7, he corrected, which makes it the single largest block of voting shares. The rest is distributed among the board members, institutional investors, and employee stock programs. The next largest individual holder has 8%. My hands were actually shaking as I held the documents. Why are you showing me this? Because I'm offering to sell it to you. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I don't have this kind of money. This is north of $800 million based on current valuations. $873 million, Arthur said. And you don't need to have it. I've arranged financing through a consortium of 3 banks that I've done business with for decades. They'll carry the note at 3% interest over 20 years, with the dividend income from the shares serving as your payment mechanism. The structure is complicated, but my attorneys have confirmed it's completely legal. I sat there trying to process what he was offering me. It was more than a transaction. It was a transfer of legacy, of responsibility, of everything he'd built over half a century. Why me? I finally asked. Arthur leaned back in his chair, and for a moment I could see past the cancer, past the exhaustion, to the young man who'd mixed his first batch of concrete in a gravel lot in 1973. Because in 15 years, I've never seen you sacrifice a person for a percentage point. You remember when we had that quality issue with the polymer additive 3 years ago? Every consultant we brought in said to ship the product anyway, that the liability risk was acceptable compared to the cost of reformulation. You're the one who stood in the boardroom and said we'd be putting people's safety at risk, that we'd lose our reputation, and that some things mattered more than quarterly earnings. We lost $4 million on that decision, I said. We kept our integrity, Arthur countered, and we kept every single client because they knew they could trust us. That's worth more than $4 million, Vaughn. That's worth everything. You understand what I built here isn't just a business. It's a promise to everyone who depends on us. The employees who have invested their careers here, the communities where our plants operate, the customers who spec our products knowing they're getting quality. He coughed, a wet rattling sound that made me wince. When he recovered, his eyes were watering, but his voice was steady. Chadwick Townsend will destroy all of that in pursuit of efficiency metrics. I've read his case studies, seen what he did at Brennan Manufacturing and Coastal Distribution. He'll sell off divisions, offshore production, eliminate anyone over 45 because their healthcare costs too much, and extract every dollar of short-term value while burning down decades of trust and relationships. The board has already approved his hiring, I asked. They've extended an offer contingent on my retirement, which my doctor's prognosis makes imminent. He starts in 4 months, 1st of July. The paperwork is all but finalized. And they don't know about this? I gestured to the folder. Nobody knows. The transactions were structured through shell companies and trusts to avoid triggering disclosure requirements until the beneficial ownership consolidates. Once you sign these documents and the banks finalize the financing, there's a 3-week period before the public filing hits. By then, I'll be gone, and Chadwick will be in the CEO chair, but you'll be the majority shareholder. The implications were staggering. He'll have operational control as CEO, but I'll have voting control of the board. Exactly, and the board serves at the pleasure of the shareholders. You'll have the power to protect what we've built here, Vaughn. But you'll also have the target on your back, the debt obligation, and the fight of your life ahead of you. I looked down at the papers again. My father's voice echoed in my memory. Sometimes doing the right thing costs you everything you have, and you do it anyway because that's what integrity means. Where do I sign? I asked. The next 3 months unfolded like watching a slow-motion catastrophe. Arthur deteriorated rapidly, his office visits becoming shorter and less frequent until he stopped coming to the building entirely. The board announced his retirement in late May, and Chadwick Townsend's appointment was formalized 2 weeks later. I spent those months doing two things: preparing for the inevitable confrontation and documenting everything I could about Stratum's operations, relationships, and culture. I interviewed every department head, reviewed contracts going back 5 years, and created a comprehensive analysis of what made Stratum successful beyond the balance sheet metrics. The closing on the stock purchase happened on June 11th, a Thursday afternoon in a conference room at the law offices of Hutchins, Mallory, and Kane. 3 banking representatives, 4 attorneys, 2 witnesses, and enough paperwork to build a small fort. I signed my name 73 times over the course of 2 hours. "Congratulations, Mr. Merritt," the lead attorney said as we shook hands. "You are now the majority shareholder of Stratum Industries. The public filing will post in 21 days. 21 days. 3 weeks for Chadwick to settle into the CEO role, to start implementing his vision, to show everyone exactly who he was." I went home that night and couldn't sleep. The weight of what I'd just done, the debt I'd assumed, the responsibility I'd accepted, it sat on my chest like a physical presence. $873 million. Even structured the way Arthur's attorneys had arranged it, even with the dividend income covering the payments. The magnitude was almost incomprehensible. But more than that, I kept thinking about the 380 employees who worked at Stratum, the families who depended on those paychecks, the communities where our manufacturing plants anchored local economies, the customers who trusted our products to perform when safety was on the line. Arthur Pemberton died on June 23rd. The funeral was held on a Saturday, and it seemed like half the business community in the state showed up. The board members were there, dressed in expensive black and speaking in the hushed tones people use when they're performing grief rather than feeling it. Chadwick Townsend was there too, of course. First time I'd seen him in person. Tall, athletic build, the kind of aggressively handsome features that probably got him modeling offers in college. He worked the crowd like a politician, all firm handshakes and practiced sympathy. "You must be Vaughn Merritt," he said when he finally made his way to where I stood near the back of the reception. "Senior VP of Strategic Development. I've been reviewing your division's performance metrics." "Have you?" I said neutrally. "Mixed results," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Some interesting initiatives, but the ROI on several projects is below industry benchmarks. We'll need to discuss optimization opportunities." Optimization, that was consultant speak for cuts. I'd welcome that conversation, I told him, and I meant it. I wanted to hear exactly what he planned to do. I wanted him to show his hand before he knew I had the power to stop him. "Excellent, I officially start Monday. Let's schedule some time in my first week." He moved on to charm someone else, leaving me standing there with Arthur's favorite niece, an environmental engineer named Nadine who'd flown in from Oregon. "That's the new CEO?" she asked quietly. "That's him." "Uncle Arthur hated him," she said. "Did you know that? Called him a vulture in a suit, said the board was too blinded by credentials to see what he really was." "Your uncle was a good judge of character," I said. "He thought the world of you," Nadine said, turning to look at me directly. "At the end, when the pain medication made him confused about a lot of things, your name was one of the few he always remembered clearly. He said you'd know what to do when the time came." The time came on Tuesday, July 7th, Chadwick's first official day as CEO. The morning started with an all-hands meeting in the main conference center. 380 people crammed into a space designed for 300, with the overflow watching on video monitors in the cafeteria. Chadwick stood on the small stage at the front, his presentation clicker in hand, a smile on his face that was probably meant to be reassuring but came off as predatory. "Change is difficult," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "But change is also necessary for growth, for competitiveness, for survival in a marketplace that doesn't reward complacency. Under Arthur Pemberton's leadership, Stratum Industries built a solid foundation. But foundations are meant to be built upon, and that's why I'm here." The presentation behind him filled with charts and graphs, all arrows pointing upward, all numbers getting bigger. Revenue projections, market share expansion, efficiency gains. Over the next 90 days, we'll be conducting a comprehensive operational review, Chadwick continued. Every department, every position, every expense will be evaluated against industry best practices and performance benchmarks. Those who add value will be rewarded, those who don't. He let the sentence trail off meaningfully. I sat in the back row, watching the faces around me grow tense. These were people who'd worked here for years, some for decades. People who'd bought houses and started families based on the stability Stratum provided. Now they were being told their livelihoods were subject to review by someone who'd been in the building for less than a day. I believe in transparency, Chadwick said, which in my experience meant he was about to be anything but. So I want to be clear about our priorities. Shareholder value is paramount. Every decision we make needs to be filtered through that lens. If something doesn't contribute to profitability, it doesn't belong in our operations. Shareholder value. If the irony wasn't so bitter, I might have laughed. The majority shareholder was sitting in the back row, and his priority was exactly the opposite of what Chadwick thought it was. The meeting broke up with a sense of unease that was almost tangible. I headed back to my office on the 3rd floor, a corner space with windows overlooking the production facility where we manufactured our specialty concrete formulations. I'd been in this office for 8 years, long enough that the furniture felt like old friends, and the view was as familiar as my own apartment. I was answering emails when Chadwick appeared in my doorway at 11:30. No knock, no appointment, just his presence filling the space like an unwelcome weather front. "Vaughn, got a minute?" "Of course," I said, gesturing to the chairs across from my desk. He didn't sit. He walked to the window, looked out at the production floor, then turned back to face me with his arms crossed. "I've been reviewing the Strategic Development Division," he said. "Specifically, your project portfolio over the past 3 years." "All right." "The Green Manufacturing Initiative. You invested $4.2 million in retrofitting our plants with emissions reduction technology that exceeded EPA requirements by 30%. "That's correct," I said. "It positioned us favorably with municipal contracts that prioritize environmental responsibility, and it reduced our long-term operational costs through efficiency improvements. It also added 6 months to our production timelines and cost us market opportunities in a competitive bidding environment," Chadwick countered. "Your Sustainability Partnerships program, you've allocated resources to mentoring minority-owned subcontractors and developing relationships with community organizations, which has expanded our supplier network, improved our community relations, and created goodwill that translates to easier permitting and regulatory processes. Which doesn't show up in your division's profit and loss statement," he said flatly. "And then there's your Workforce Development Initiative, where you've been funding continuing education programs and skills training that benefit employees across the company, not just your division. Employee development is an investment in our institutional knowledge and our capacity to innovate," I said, keeping my voice level despite the direction this was clearly heading. Chadwick walked back toward my desk, and there was something in his expression that went beyond professional disagreement. This was personal for him. This was about establishing dominance. "Here's what I see, Vaughn. I see someone who's been playing with company money like it's a charitable foundation. I see someone who values feeling good about himself more than delivering results. I see dead weight on this payroll." The words hung in the air between us. Through the glass walls of my office, I could see people in the hallway slowing down, noticing the confrontation. "Pack your desk," Chadwick said, loud enough that his voice carried. "Your employment with Stratum Industries is terminated effective immediately." The hallway had gone silent. Faces appeared at cubicle openings and office doors, drawn by the unmistakable tone of a public execution. Chadwick had positioned himself so that anyone walking past had a clear view into my office, a clear view of the new CEO demonstrating his authority by discarding a 15-year veteran executive like defective merchandise. I stood up slowly, carefully, keeping my expression neutral. Every instinct screamed at me to tell him exactly who held the real power here, to watch his face when he realized he'd just fired the majority shareholder. But that would be a mistake. That would be emotional, reactive, and exactly the kind of move that squandered strategic advantage. I'll need that in writing, I said calmly. Termination documentation, severance calculation, the formal paperwork. HR will send you the documents, Chadwick said dismissively. Escort him out, he added, gesturing to two security guards who had materialized in the hallway. The walk from my office to the building exit was the longest 200 yards of my life. The security guards were guys I'd known for years, Frank and Antonio, both good men who looked profoundly uncomfortable with their assignment. The hallway crowd parted as we approached, colleagues and subordinates watching with expressions ranging from shock to carefully concealed satisfaction. Sorry, Vaughn, Frank muttered as we reached the elevator. Not your fault, I told him. You're doing your job. The elevator ride down was silent. The walk through the main lobby drew more stares. The summer sun outside felt surreal after the fluorescent interior, and my car sat in its assigned spot in the executive parking area, completely oblivious to the fact that I no longer had the title that justified the prime real estate. I sat in the driver's seat and pulled out my phone. The first call was to my attorney, a sharp woman named Catherine Ashford who'd been part of the team handling the stock purchase. Catherine, it's Vaughn Merritt. I need you to prepare documentation for the board meeting on Monday. What kind of documentation? The kind that removes a CEO, I said. And I need a comprehensive briefing packet on shareholder rights, board governance procedures, and the corporate bylaws related to executive termination. He fired you? She sounded somewhere between shocked and delighted. He actually fired the majority shareholder. He doesn't know yet, I said. The public filing doesn't post until Thursday. Right now, as far as he's aware, he just eliminated what he perceives as an obstacle to his vision for the company. This is going to be spectacular, Catherine said. I'll have everything ready by tomorrow morning. Vaughn, Arthur would have loved this. The second call was to the board chairman, a retired manufacturing executive named Walter Hutchins who'd been with Stratum since the early days. Walter was 71, shrewd, and deeply skeptical of Chadwick despite having voted for his appointment. Walter, it's Vaughn Merritt. I heard, he said grimly. Chadwick called me 20 minutes ago to inform me he'd terminated your employment, said it was necessary to establish new performance standards. Did he provide specifics on the cause for termination? Vague references to underperformance and misalignment with strategic priorities. Honestly, Vaughn, I argued against it. You've been one of our most effective executives, and this seems both premature and poorly handled. But he's the CEO, and personnel decisions fall under his operational authority. I understand, I said. Walter, I need you to schedule an emergency board meeting for Monday morning, 9 a.m. On what grounds? Shareholder request, the majority shareholder to be specific. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. Excuse me. The public filing goes live Thursday, but I'm giving you advance notice as a courtesy and a legal requirement. 3 weeks ago, I acquired 43.7% of Stratum's voting shares through a structured purchase agreement with Arthur Pemberton. I'm now the majority shareholder, and I'm calling an emergency board session to address the CEO's conduct and performance. Walter's laugh was sudden and sharp as a gunshot. Oh, Arthur, you magnificent bastard. He knew exactly what would happen, and he gave you the tools to stop it. Will you schedule the meeting? I asked. With tremendous pleasure, Walter said. This should be very educational for Mr. Townsend. The next 6 days unfolded in a strange, suspended reality. I spent my time preparing for Monday's board meeting with the intensity of a lawyer preparing for the trial of the century. Catherine Ashford and her team assembled a comprehensive brief on every aspect of Chadwick's first week as CEO, and what we found was even worse than I'd anticipated. By Wednesday, he'd fired 3 more senior executives, the VP of Human Resources, the Chief Technology Officer, and the Director of Quality Assurance. All 3 were over 50, all 3 had been with the company for more than a decade, and all 3 were replaced with outside consultants from Kellerman and Associates at twice the salary. By Thursday, the day the public filing revealed my majority shareholder status, he'd announced a 90-day operational review that was actually a pretext for systematic workforce reduction. The consulting team he'd brought in was already identifying redundancies and optimization opportunities. By Friday, word had leaked to the industry press that Stratum Industries was undergoing strategic restructuring under new leadership. Our stock price jumped 4% on speculation that Chadwick would unlock shareholder value through aggressive cost management. What Chadwick didn't know, what nobody except Walter and a few key board members knew, was that the public filing had revealed something that was about to change everything. Friday afternoon, the stock registrar's office updated the beneficial ownership records, and suddenly my name appeared as the holder of 43.7% of Stratum's voting shares. Chadwick found out at 6:15 on Friday evening. I know the exact time because Catherine called me laughing so hard she could barely speak. He just called Walter, she managed between gasps. Demanded to know why he wasn't informed that there was a major shareholder change. Walter told him that public filings are public information and that as CEO he should be monitoring such things. How did Chadwick react? According to Walter, there was a long silence, then some very creative profanity, then a demand to know who this Vaughn Merritt person was and why he'd accumulated such a large position. And Walter said, he told Chadwick that Vaughn Merritt was the Senior VP of Strategic Development that he'd fired on Tuesday, and that the Monday morning emergency board meeting would be an excellent opportunity to discuss the situation. I spent the weekend going over my presentation one more time. The conference room at Stratum's headquarters had a boardroom table that seated 18, with Arthur Pemberton's chair at the head remaining symbolically empty since his death. Monday morning at 9 a.m. That room would be the site of the most important corporate confrontation of my life. I arrived at 8:30. The security guards looked confused when I walked in. Frank actually reached for his radio before I held up my hand. I'm here for the board meeting, I told him. Walter Hutchins is expecting me. You don't work here anymore, Frank said uncertainly. I'm a shareholder, I corrected. Check with Walter if you need confirmation. The lobby had that Monday morning energy. People arriving with coffee cups and weekend stories, completely unaware that the entire direction of the company was about to shift. I took the elevator to the executive floor, walked past my old office, which was already being occupied by some consultant I didn't recognize, and headed to the boardroom. Walter was already there, looking more energized than I'd seen him in years. Vaughn, good to see you. Walter, thank you for scheduling this. Wouldn't miss it for anything, he said. The other board members have been briefed on the shareholder situation. Most of them are, let's say, intrigued by the development. The board members arrived over the next 20 minutes. 11 directors total, representing various constituencies, institutional investors, employee stock program representatives, independent directors with industry expertise. They greeted me with varying degrees of warmth, curiosity, and calculation. Chadwick arrived at 8:58, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in 6 days, his eyes red-rimmed, and his jaw tight with barely contained fury. Mr. Merritt, he said, investing my name with enough contempt to fill a reservoir. I wasn't aware terminated employees were invited to board meetings. Mr. Merritt is here as the majority shareholder, Walter said smoothly. He requested this emergency session, which is his right under the corporate bylaws. Chadwick took his seat at what had been Arthur's place at the head of the table, a piece of territorial claiming that made several board members exchange glances. I sat 3 seats down on the right side, Catherine Ashford in the chair beside me with her briefcase full of documentation. Let's begin, Walter said. This emergency session has been called at the request of Vaughn Merritt, who holds 43.7% of Stratum's voting shares. Vaughn, you have the floor. I stood, triggering the presentation I'd loaded onto the boardroom's display system. The first slide showed Stratum's performance metrics over the past 15 years. Steady growth, consistent profitability, industry-leading safety record, and employee retention rates that were exceptional for the manufacturing sector. Arthur Pemberton built this company on a foundation of quality, integrity, and sustainable business practices, I began. For half a century, Stratum has been profitable not despite treating people well, but because we treat people well. Our reputation in the industry is built on trust, on delivering what we promise, and on maintaining relationships that extend beyond individual transactions. The next slide showed Chadwick's one-week tenure. 4 senior executives terminated, consulting fees exceeding $1.2 million, workforce morale surveys showing a 38% negative shift, customer service response times increasing by 40%, as experienced staff worried about their jobs rather than serving clients. In 6 days, our new CEO has damaged relationships it took years to build, eliminated institutional knowledge that can't be replaced, and created an atmosphere of fear that is already affecting our operational performance. Chadwick's face had gone red. This is completely inappropriate. Personnel decisions are the CEO's prerogative, and second-guessing my judgment in front of the board undermines the authority. The authority that this board granted you, I interrupted, and that this board can revoke. You serve at the pleasure of the directors who are elected by the shareholders. I am the majority shareholder. You work for me, Mr. Townsend. The silence that followed was profound. Several board members were visibly suppressing smiles. Others looked uncomfortable with the confrontation but not necessarily disagreeing with the substance. Your approach to leadership, I continued, is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes Stratum valuable. You see inefficiency where there's actually investment in long-term sustainability. You see dead weight where there's actually expertise and relationships that drive client loyalty. You see costs where there's actually the foundation of our competitive advantage. I clicked to the next slide, showing client feedback from the past week. 3 major accounts had called to express concern about the leadership change. 2 were actively soliciting bids from competitors. 1 had explicitly mentioned that their relationship with Stratum was based on personal trust in the team that Chadwick was systematically eliminating. Arthur Pemberton understood something that modern business school case studies often miss, I said. Profit is the result of creating value, not the result of extracting it. When you create value for clients, for employees, for communities, the financial returns follow naturally and sustainably. When you extract value through cost-cutting and efficiency maximization, you get short-term gains and long-term collapse. Chadwick stood abruptly. I've heard enough of this idealistic nonsense. I was brought here to maximize shareholder returns, and I intend to do exactly that. If you don't have the stomach for the hard decisions required to compete in a modern marketplace, then you should sell your shares to someone who does. Sit down, Mr. Townsend, Walter said quietly. You're not in charge of this meeting. I'm the CEO of this company. At the moment, I said, but that status is subject to board approval, and I'm recommending that this board terminate your employment effective immediately. The room erupted in overlapping voices. 3 board members tried to speak at once. Chadwick was shouting something about contracts and severance agreements. Catherine was calmly distributing documentation to each board member outlining the legal framework for executive termination. Walter's gavel, an actual wooden gavel that Arthur had used for decades, came down hard on the table 3 times. Order! We will have order in this meeting. The room settled into tense silence. Catherine had finished distributing her packets, and the board members were scanning through the contents with varying expressions of surprise, concern, and interest. Before we discuss termination, said one of the directors, a woman named Eleanor Blackstone who represented a large institutional investor, I'd like to understand Mr. Merritt's vision for leadership. If we remove Mr. Townsend, what's the alternative? What's your plan for Stratum's future? It was the question I'd been preparing for all weekend. I clicked to a new slide showing a 3-year strategic plan. First, we restore the management team, I said. I'm recommending we reinstate the 4 executives who were terminated this week, with formal apologies and compensation for the disruption. These are people with decades of combined experience and relationships throughout the industry. Losing them was strategically foolish. That's a sign of weakness, Chadwick interjected. It tells the entire organization that decisions can be reversed if people complain loud enough. It tells the organization that we correct mistakes when we make them, I countered, which is actually a sign of strength and integrity. Second, I continued, we refocus on operational excellence rather than operational reduction. Yes, there are efficiencies to be gained. Every organization has room for improvement. But those improvements should enhance our capability, not diminish it. We invest in technology, in training, in systems that make our people more effective rather than simply reducing headcount. Eleanor was nodding slowly. What about profitability targets? We maintain our historical growth trajectory of 8 to 12% annual revenue increase and 15 to 18% operating margins, I said. Those are excellent numbers for our industry, and they're sustainable because they're built on genuine competitive advantage rather than cost extraction. Another director, a man named Raymond Foster who'd been skeptical of Chadwick from the beginning, leaned forward. And leadership? You're recommending we terminate Chadwick, but who runs the company? Interim leadership would be a management committee consisting of the division VPs, with Walter Hutchins providing board oversight until we identify a permanent CEO who shares Arthur's values and vision. This is insane, Chadwick said. You're going to run this company by committee. You're going to sacrifice competitive positioning for feel-good management philosophy. I guarantee you'll be bankrupt within 2 years. Arthur ran this company profitably for 50 years using these exact principles, I said. The only thing that's changed is that people like you decided that stripping value was somehow more sophisticated than creating it. People like me, Chadwick repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. You mean people with actual credentials, actual experience in modern corporate management. You're a middle manager who got lucky with a stock purchase. You have no business making strategic decisions for a billion-dollar enterprise. And yet, I said calmly, I hold the voting majority. Your credentials are impressive, Mr. Townsend. Harvard Business School, 10 years at Kellerman and Associates, a resume full of companies you've restructured. But when I look at those companies you restructured, really look at them, I see a pattern. Brennan Manufacturing sold for parts 2 years after you left. Coastal Distribution bankrupt within 3 years. Harmon Industrial merged into a competitor after massive layoffs destroyed their operational capacity. I'd done my homework. Catherine's research team had traced every company Chadwick had touched, and the pattern was unmistakable. He created short-term paper profits that looked impressive in quarterly reports, and long-term organizational damage that became someone else's problem after he collected his bonuses and moved to the next victim. You destroy things, I said. That's your actual expertise. You're very good at it, very efficient, very credentialed. But Stratum Industries is not going to be another casualty in your portfolio of corporate corpses. Chadwick's face had gone from red to nearly purple. You self-righteous. Mr. Townsend, Walter interrupted, I think we've heard enough. I'm calling for a vote on the CEO position. All those in favor of terminating Chadwick Townsend's employment as Chief Executive Officer of Stratum Industries, effective immediately. 8 hands went up. Out of 11 directors, 8 voted for termination. Eleanor Blackstone and 2 other directors representing institutional investors abstained, probably worried about the optics of executive instability. Nobody voted against. The motion carries, Walter said. Mr. Townsend, your employment with Stratum Industries is terminated. HR will be in contact regarding your severance package and the terms of your separation agreement. Chadwick stood frozen for a moment, visibly trying to process the fact that his 6-day tenure as CEO had just ended. Then he grabbed his leather portfolio, looked directly at me with an expression of pure hatred, and spoke in a voice that was terrifyingly calm. You have no idea what you've just done, he said. I will bury you. I will make sure every business publication, every investor, every analyst knows that Stratum Industries is run by an amateur who values feelings over performance. Your stock price will collapse. Your clients will leave. And when this company is circling the drain, when you're begging for someone to save it, I'll be there to watch it die. Noted, I said. Security will escort you to collect your personal items. He left, flanked by the same 2 security guards who'd escorted me out 6 days earlier. Frank and Antonio looked significantly more comfortable with this assignment. After the door closed, Eleanor Blackstone spoke up. Vaughn, I abstained from the vote not because I disagreed with the decision, but because I need to report to my investors. They're going to want assurance that this isn't going to become a pattern of instability. Understood, I said. I'm proposing we engage an executive search firm to identify CEO candidates who have both operational excellence credentials and a track record of sustainable, ethical leadership. The search should be thorough, transparent, and the final candidates should be interviewed by this full board. Timeline, she asked. 4 to 6 months. The management committee structure will keep operations stable during the search. Raymond Foster was nodding. What about you, Vaughn? You clearly have strong opinions about how this company should be run. Why not take the CEO role yourself? It was a fair question, one I'd anticipated. Because I'm not the right person for it, I said honestly. I have expertise in strategic development, in building relationships and managing complex projects. But CEO-level leadership requires skills I don't have and experience I haven't accumulated. Arthur understood the difference between passion for something and qualification to lead it. He gave me the shares because he trusted my judgment and my values, not because he thought I should run the company. That's remarkably self-aware, Eleanor said. Most people in your position would assume the title came with the stock. Most people in my position would probably not be in this position, I said. Arthur chose carefully. The meeting continued for another 2 hours. We discussed immediate operational priorities, communication strategy for announcing the CEO change, and the framework for the executive search. By noon, we had a coherent plan and a unified board. Walter walked me to the elevator afterward. Arthur would be proud, he said. Not just of what you did in there, but how you did it. You didn't humiliate Chadwick unnecessarily. You stated facts, made your case, and let the decision stand on its merits. Chadwick humiliated himself, I said. I just provided the mirror. What's your next move? Walter asked. I'm going back to work, I said. The Strategic Development Division still has projects that need attention, and I've been away from my desk for a week. You were fired, Walter pointed out with a smile. And as majority shareholder, I'm unfiring myself. I'll take a VP-level salary, continue doing the work I'm good at, and let the management committee handle the operational leadership until we find the right CEO. The elevator arrived, and I stepped inside. As the doors began to close, Walter called out, Vaughn, thank you for fighting for what Arthur built, for remembering that companies are made of people, not just numbers. Someone had to, I said. The aftermath of that Monday board meeting rippled through Stratum Industries like a stone dropped in still water. The 4 terminated executives were reinstated by Tuesday afternoon, with formal letters of apology and compensation packages that acknowledged the disruption. The consulting team from Kellerman and Associates was dismissed, their contracts terminated, and their recommendations filed directly into the recycling bin. The workforce response was almost immediate. By Wednesday, the internal morale surveys showed a 46% positive shift from the previous week's numbers. By Friday, 2 of the 3 major clients who'd been considering alternative suppliers had called to confirm their ongoing commitment to Stratum. The business press, predictably, had a field day with the story. CEO ousted after 6 days was the headline in the Wall Street Journal. Stratum Industries board reverses course on leadership was how the Financial Times framed it. The stock price fluctuated wildly for about 2 weeks before settling back, almost exactly where it had been before Chadwick's appointment was announced. Chadwick himself made good on his threat to attack publicly. He gave interviews describing Stratum as a backward-looking company that refused to embrace modern management practices. He published an article in a business magazine arguing that excessive concern for employee welfare was incompatible with competitive success. He became a minor celebrity in certain consulting circles as an example of a visionary leader crushed by entrenched interests. None of it mattered. The companies that hired consultants from Kellerman and Associates weren't our clients anyway. The investors who believed profit required cruelty weren't the kind of shareholders we wanted. And the business school case studies that would inevitably use Chadwick's 6-day tenure as an example of something. Either corporate courage or corporate foolishness, depending on the professor's perspective, would be debated by people who'd never actually built anything. The executive search took 5 months. We interviewed 14 candidates, all of them impressive on paper, many of them genuinely qualified. We ultimately hired a woman named Rachel Zimmerman who'd spent 20 years at a competing firm building their sustainable materials division from a pet project into a $200 million revenue stream. She had the operational expertise we needed, and the values alignment Arthur would have insisted upon. I stayed on as Senior VP of Strategic Development. The debt obligation from the stock purchase was enormous, but the dividend income covered the payments with enough left over that I wasn't eating ramen noodles for dinner. The weight of being the majority shareholder never really went away. Every quarterly report, every strategic decision, Every personnel issue carried the knowledge that ultimately the responsibility landed with me. But there was also a deeper satisfaction than I'd ever experienced in my career. Stratum Industries continued to grow, continued to innovate, and continued to prove that profitability and principles weren't mutually exclusive. We became a case study ourselves, cited in business ethics courses as an example of stakeholder capitalism done right. 3 years after that board meeting, I was in my office reviewing proposals for a new manufacturing technology when my assistant knocked on the door. "Vaughn, there's someone here to see you. Says it's personal." The visitor was Nadine Pemberton, Arthur's niece. She was carrying a small wooden box, weathered and clearly old. "Nadine," I said, standing to greet her, "this is a surprise. What brings you to town?" "I was cleaning out Uncle Arthur's storage unit," she said, "and I found this. It has your name on it." She handed me the box. On top was an envelope with my name written in Arthur's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a letter dated 3 days before he died. "Vaughn," it read, "if you're reading this, then you've survived whatever Chadwick tried to do to my company. I knew he'd target you specifically. People like him always eliminate the threats they can identify first. I knew you'd be smart enough to wait, to let him show exactly who he was before you used the power I gave you. And I knew you'd win, because you understand what he never could. Businesses are built by people, and people respond to being treated like human beings instead of resources to be optimized. The box contains something I want you to have. Use it to remember why we do this work, why it matters, and what we're actually building. You're going to be a better steward of Stratum than I ever was, because you had to fight for it in ways I never did. Make me proud, Vaughn. Make them all proud, Arthur." Inside the box was a small piece of concrete, rough and irregular, with a date stamped in the corner, May 15, 1973. The first batch Arthur Pemberton had ever mixed, the literal foundation of everything that came after. I keep it on my desk now, next to the family photo of my parents outside their hardware store. 2 reminders of where things actually come from, of the work and the people and the principles that build something worth protecting. Chadwick Townsend went on to other companies, other restructurings, other opportunities to maximize shareholder value through aggressive cost management. The pattern continued: short-term gains, long-term damage, resume bullets that looked impressive until you examined the aftermath. We never crossed paths again, but I occasionally saw his name in business publications, always associated with transformation and efficiency and optimization. I wondered sometimes if he ever understood what he'd lost in those 6 days at Stratum, if he ever recognized that the dead weight he'd tried to eliminate was actually the living heart of something he'd been too blind to see. Probably not. People like Chadwick rarely question their assumptions, rarely pause to consider that their entire worldview might be built on a fundamental misunderstanding of what creates value and what destroys it. But that's not my problem anymore. Final subscriber CTA. The story of corporate power isn't just about who sits in the executive chair or whose name appears on the stock certificates. It's about the choices people make when they have power, about whether they use it to create or extract, to build or strip, to invest in people or reduce them to line items on a spreadsheet. If you believe these stories matter, if you want to be part of a community that examines how business really works behind the polished press releases and quarterly reports, then subscribe to the Corporate Vault channel. We're building something here, a place where the truth about corporate America gets examined honestly and thoroughly. Your support helps us reach that first milestone of 1,000 subscribers, 1,000 people who refuse to accept the sanitized version of how power operates in the business world. The subscribe button is right there. Join us. Let's keep examining these stories together, because understanding how power works is the first step toward changing how it's used. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.